The content of this video is intended for service technicians. The procedures and processes depicted are to be performed only by trained technicians. All procedures and processes were filmed in a controlled environment. Some safety equipment and/or safety guards or barriers have been removed or foregone for visual clarity. Always read and apply the general and specific safety rules and safety messages presented in the appropriate service manual and operator's manual. Always wear appropriate personal protection equipment.
Hello, my name is James Shack with C&H Industrial Technical Training. We're here today to talk about the hydraulic PTO pump system used on the early riser planter. The hydraulic PTO pumps that we offer for use on various early riser planters have various displacements, including 14, 22, 36, and 40 gallon per minute pumps. The 14 and 22 gallon per minute PTO pump are both single section, while the 36 and 40 gallon per minute PTO pumps are both two section. The PTO pumps come in two different mounting options, a tractor mounted and a planter mounted option. The mounting option is going to vary based on the type of pump and the frame of early riser planter. The 1250 or 1255 early riser planters will only use a tractor mounted PTO pump. A 1240 or 1245 early riser planter has an offering for both a tractor mounted and a planter mounted PTO hydraulic pump. A 1260 or 1265 early riser planter only offers a planter mounted PTO hydraulic pump. The planter mounted PTO pumps can be purchased with 1 3/8 or 1 3/4 1000 RPM PTO shafts. Depending on the size of the PTO shaft, there are two mounting holes for the PTO pump gearbox. For example, this planter is set up with the 1 3/4 1000 RPM PTO shaft, which requires the pump placement to be in the rear set of holes on the planter. Also, depending on which size of PTO shaft you are using, it's important to make sure we set the drawbar length appropriately by measuring from the face of the PTO shaft to the drawbar hitch pin hole center. On a planter mounted PTO pump, it's important to check the gearbox oil level. This is done by removing the oil level plug. The proper level is when oil just starts to run out of the oil level hole. Do not overfill the gearbox. It is recommended to replace the oil in the gearbox after the first 50 hours of service. After that, replace every 200 hours or at the beginning of each new season. Oil that is recommended in the gearbox is Gear Lube SSL 75W90. Part number 87301660. Depending on the size of the PTO pump and the vintage of the planter, the size of the tank reservoir will vary. It's important to ensure that the reservoir has the proper level of oil by checking the oil reservoir level. All oil conditioning, including oil cooling and oil filtration, is performed on the return side of the PTO hydraulic system. Oil cooling is performed with either a single or a dual core cooler depending on the size of the PTO system. The oil cooler fan is activated by a 160-degree thermostatic switch. This switch is in the normally open position and will close when the temperature setting is reached. The 12-volt power for the oil cooler fan is provided from the 7-pin trailer light plug that is connected to the tractor. It is very important to ensure that 12 volts is present on the number 7 auxiliary pin when the tractor key is turned on. As part of a setup inspection or pre-delivery inspection, it's recommended to disconnect the thermostatic switch from the fan circuit, jump the power pins between the connector, and ensure the fan operates correctly. After the oil passes through the oil cooler, it passes into the oil filter. The oil filter housing does have a pressure bypass in the event that the oil filter becomes blocked. On any early riser planter that is using a PTO hydraulic pump, the valve block that is supplied oil from the hydraulic pump must contain a pressure relief valve, which will relieve excess system pressure, and it must contain an unloading valve, which will relieve unused or excess flow from the open center hydraulic system. If a valve block is not supplied by the PTO pump and rather supplied by the tractor, the pressure relief and unloading valve must be removed and replaced with the appropriate plugs. This drawing shows a 36 gallon per minute, 2-section PTO pump that could be used on a 1240 or 1245 early riser planter. Looking at a hydraulic drawing for a PTO hydraulic system, as we've already seen, the system will include a reservoir, a PTO pump, a pressure relief valve, an unloading valve, an oil cooler, and an oil filter. When you have a 36 gallon per minute or 40 gallon per minute system, those will be a 2-section pump. If you have a 22 gallon per minute or 14 gallon per minute pump, that is a single section pump. When the PTO pumps are turned on, the fixed displacement pump will begin to move oil to the valve blocks that are being supplied by the PTO system. At this point, no components are activated. With no components turned on, such as a vacuum fan or seed drives, oil pressure begins to build within the valve block. Used with a PTO pump system is the relief valve and an unloading valve. These two components have different spring set points. The relief valve has a 2400 psi set point, and the unloading valve has a 250 psi set point. As the pressure builds within the valve block, the 250 psi spring of the unloading valve is pushed open and all the oil is removed across the unloading valve and back to tank, completing our open center system. As a component turns on, such as a vacuum fan, oil passes the proportional valve and moves to the component motor. Pilot pressure is transferred through the valve block and works against the unloading valve, in addition to the 250 psi spring within the unloading valve. This will allow adequate flow to the component, but also unload any excess flow back to the reservoir. As additional components turn on, such as the seed drive motors, additional pilot pressure will work with the vacuum pilot pressure against the unloading valve to further close the unloading valve. This allows adequate flow to all components while still unloading any excess flow back to reservoir. If there is a spike in PTO pump system pressure, the pressure relief will open at 2400 psi and relieve the pressure to the return side and back to the reservoir. Attached to the pilot pressure line is a flow limiter, which is fixed at 0.3 gallons per minute. This allows oil to escape the pilot pressure line in a small quantity and return back to tank.